Stationeers is the project we've just announced, and it's kind of inspired by a cult classic game called Space Station 13, which is a very sort of nerdy game. If you've ever played Minecraft Feed the Beast, this game will be instantly familiar. So basically, it's designed around multiplayer, but it can be played single player. But you and your friends over a very long period of time build these stations. And you build all the complex machinery that comes with it. So you need to build filtration systems, you need to build smelting systems, you need to build hydroponic systems. For hydroponics, you need to get like 4% carbon dioxide. For different plants, you need different temperatures, and all these different things like that. So you're going through all the motions of having to build a station. And that sort of begs the question of why. And while you're building this station, you also build this little shuttle, and you use the shuttle to go off and go on away missions. So you can explore like derelict stations, you can kill aliens, you can explore planets, and then you get resources and you bring them back to your station and make your station more awesome.
So I think the sandbox element of it is going to be appeal to a lot of people, especially because I mean Space Station 13 made you do a lot of awkward things so that you know for the sake of a sense of realism, but people loved sort of fucking around with it really, and is that baked into what you're making?
Yeah, so I mean it's an important distinction is we're not doing a Space Station 13 remake. If you look at what we're doing, what I'm very interested in is the concept of persistence. So if you look at DayZ, for example, instead of it being very round-based, it was very persistent. When you log back in, you have the same character. This is exactly what we're doing with Stationeers. So the idea is that instead of it being round-based and just resetting every couple of hours, you and your friends are building the station over a long period of time. When we get the player numbers up a bit higher, you'll be able to even run public servers then. So then you might have people coming in who maybe aren't doing so good on your station.
In my experience, I was sort of walked through how to pressurize a room and then open a door, and Joe unfortunately catapulted out of it. So there's, I mean, one of your staff members was telling me like, you know, that there's room for building like space stations that are just full of traps and like almost like space dungeons.
Well, I guess that one of the game loops that's working and the one that you really see is the construction. And for many people that's enough. For me, that's really not enough in a game. I need other game loops and, you know, and the survival elements we've expanded a bit and stuff like that. And so that's why we're not out in early access yet, because there's really only sort of the construction and some of the other mechanics around it. You know, and a lot of people just like that building, but I know for me and for what we want to achieve, we want there to be more of a reason of why am I building this. And I think definitely the multiplayer element is very important. So that's why, like you see here, these are all clients, and we've got one host down the end.
Like earlier when you were talking, people were shouting about something, like they were having a lot of fun, even though it's early on, it's actually from struggle to sort of figure out what you're doing. So it's obviously resonating to that wavelength.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's a very valid point you were saying. It's one of the reasons we took the game to the show here, was that it's actually kind of hard to explain what it is. So I gave the rough elevator pitch, but really you sort of have to sit down and show people, well, I can build this computer and I can build this console and I can put this motherboard in. That's a real challenge for us. It's a real challenge for Space Station 13. It's a real challenge for us, and we still haven't solved that. Definitely when you put the time in and we show people the game, if it's the kind of game they like, they understand it. But there is a gap there of explaining it. And so, you know, one of the purposes of the show is to figure out how do we get better at explaining exactly what the game is.
So DayZ kind of was the first one to sort of popularise the sort of survival genre we've got these days. Obviously lots of games like it now, like Rust, Ark, etc. Like when I first played DayZ, I thought, oh, this is a game about surviving, with like work together with my friends to survive. But actually, well, a lot of it came down to was shooting anyone you came across, and that's the same with a lot of these games. And so Stationeers seems like it's a bit less about the kind of combat in there that I see so far. But you mentioned about you might have some guys come in and sabotage you. So how much is it towards kind of collaborating versus maybe any kind of combat or fighting your opponents and such?
Yeah. Well, I think your point's exactly right. A lot of people think that for me DayZ is all about the gunplay. Now the gunplay is very important, but there's plenty of games out there that do gunplay and do it far better. With the mods, certainly, I was far more interested in those nuanced layers that appear on as part of survival. And that's why people say this is a completely different game. To me, it's kind of not. It's just we sort of did some of the gunplay stuff. This is about stripping out the graphics, adding in, like you couldn't really do base building in DayZ. Even in Rust, it's kind of hard. Even in Ark, right? It's kind of hard to do really extensive building and really extensive systems and cables and computers and logic. That's what we've looked at doing with this.
Like my first impression was kind of I walked in and it was sort of, that was like kind of a cross between DayZ and Minecraft, or Space Engineers, sorry, but that wasn't my first impression really. My first impression was I walked in and I saw a bunch of floating arms. What's going on with that? Why are there so many arms everywhere?
Yeah, so I mean at the moment we have sort of the admin spawn. I think it's kind of cool that some of the comical nature of Space Station 13 has sort of seemed to have flown through into the game. Which is kind of important. I mean, from my perspective, it's quite a serious game, even though it necessarily doesn't look it. You know, due to the science nature, like you have people burning hydrogen and oxygen to produce water. You know, it produces a lot of heat, produces a lot of pressure. But at the same time, I mean, you know, people have a lot of fun with it and fool around.
And so lastly, that just made me think then, so you mentioned kind of people making water from all the gases, and is that a very kind of planned thing? This is exactly what you want people to do with this machinery, or is it kind of very sandboxy, here's some buttons that do things, and you'll kind of see what the player base does with it?
We're very much at the sandboxy phase, and I think we always will. When we do the away missions, tomorrow we're releasing our roadmap and discussing how we're doing these away missions. That'll be a lot more opportunity to talk about what is the scenario in. So one of the classic scenarios is you're crash landed on a planet, you have a little bit of stuff, you know, Mark Watney style, like in The Martian, and you have to survive from there and thrive and that sort of stuff. And that gives it a little bit more of a solid context to the experience. So we're going to allow lots of different scenarios for the player to start in and where they want to start.
Sounds good.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Thanks, guys.